Hello, and good morning teachers and peers, and a happy Monday to you all. My name is Matthew Cobo, and I'd like to welcome you all to my presentation on filmmaking. During the course of my senior year, I've immersed myself in the idea of filmmaking. I questioned how to retain audience attention with the camera, interviewed individuals in the field, and researched what motivates filmmakers. All of that research and analyzing has led me to this moment today to share with you the following story. But before we start, I wanted to give a quick overview of what is to come. First, I'm going to give a brief background on what got me interested in filmmaking, followed by the introduction of my essential question. I'll define some common terms, and then give a look at each of the steps of the filmmaking process. Following that, I'll compare and contrast a small collection of directors to find the differences between them, and also find what influences them. Finally, I'll be summarizing my findings, answering my EQ, and then that'll be a wrap for the presentation. So as I'm sure many others can relate to, I grew up being a huge fan of Lego. I recall begging my parents for the latest Star Wars set at Toys R Us. It was around this time that I also started watching YouTube. I watched reviews of sets to see if I should buy them, or rather beg my parents to buy them. These videos led me down a trail of stop-motion videos that were fascinating to me. Unlike any other 10-year-old kid, I embarked upon setting up my own YouTube channel to upload stop-motion videos. I had tons of fun. And while these videos might not have been the best quality, those seeds of camera angles and story development were planted in my head. After a few years, I moved on from stop motion to gaming. These involved building up skills upon what I learned from my stop motion advanced editing and recording skills. It was around this time I came to the realization that there was a career for doing this and wanted to find the path to do this when I grew up. I used these early acquired skills for video projects throughout middle school and throughout the beginning of high school. As soon as I stepped into my junior year, I knew I wanted to participate in INI Poly. This is where I finally decided what career I wanted to go into. I loved all the creative aspects of the elective, such as finding a subject to cover, finding the people to interview, filming it, editing it, and all the different steps. Having grown up watching and producing stop motion, I was strongly influenced by the editing and filming aspects, but I wondered, how were directors influenced? Were they influenced because they wrote the script so they had a better grasp on the idea of the film, or did they know that incorporating visual effects was difficult to them, so they stayed away from them? This is where I formed my EQ, and when searching for the answer, I found a wide variety of them. So let's define some common terms. The first of which is director. A director's job is to bring the script, whether it be one they wrote or one written before, to life using actors, props, or whatever else the script requires. The director uses artistic and creative aspects to bring everything together. In addition, they must collaborate in each section of the filmmaking process to make sure the creative vision is maintained. The screenwriter's responsibility is laying down the groundwork for what is heard, the characters, and storyline. Teamwork is needed during the process, as working with the producers and directors is crucial to achieve the end product of the story they want to tell. Usually, screenwriters specialize in one type of genre, whether it be action, comedy, horror, what have you. When the writing is completed, not all work is done though, as it is highly likely that the screenwriter may need to come back to edit parts of the script if the production calls for it. The producer is a role that many people might not know about. While there are a variety of different jobs that are derived from the role, I'm just going to be grouping the roles and looking at them as one. The producer is sort of like the Nick Fury of the film, getting all the different crew and talent together. They hire most of the key members, set a budget, purchase the rights, hire a PR team, and more. As you can see, this role requires a lot of work, and that's why there's so many jobs to fill in those roles. So to sum it up, the producer dabbles in a little bit of everything. In the business, you never really see someone who does just writing or directing. It's usually more than one job. Because of this, the people on the right have done more than just the job listed. From top to bottom is Jon Favreau, the man who directed Iron Man, Chef and the Jungle Book, Andrew Stanton, who has written Monsters Inc., all four Toy Stories and Finding Dory. Last and not least, we have Dave Filoni, who has produced many of the Star Wars animated shows and The Mandalorian. Now that we have a basic foundation of the essential terminology and of who does what, let's embark on the filmmaking process. The inception of the film production process is the idea of development. This can start in a wide variety of ways. Whether it's a fresh idea, a continuation of a series, or an adaptation of pre-existing media, there are a wide variety of options. The next step is the pitching of ideas, which can come usually from a director and or writer, and they would usually be pitching it to a producer. Usually, the script would already be written so production can move forward. These are just some examples. In the film industry, there are a lot of ways creativity is sparked. The video playing is from the film Marriage Story, and at the bottom there is a script being played to provide you with some insight. Moving on, pre-production. This is where things start getting set in stone. This step is where all the planning of where the shoot is going to take place, scheduling all the actors, creating props. The budget is set. Auditions and hiring of actors and all other jobs are done. This step is obviously one of the longest steps, as there are a lot of behind-the-scenes activities going on. Camera blocking, practice, and a lot of the tasks necessary to perfect before cameras roll. The magic happens during the period of principal photography. Actors are acting out their lines, directors are giving them tips on what to improve on, secondary units are going out at the same time, filming smaller scenes, last minute changes to the script, finding out something you recorded on a previous date didn't work out, so you need to record it again, member of the crew doesn't show up to film. A lot can go wrong and right during this period. That is why it is imperative to have proper planning from the pre-production stage, so these things are ironed out. The filming time on a big Hollywood film can vary from when it finally wraps. However, the duration of most is 40 to 70 days. This timeline can vary depending on shooting location, accounting for outside shots, and delaying for the weather. For example, in the film 1917, weather was a pivotal factor of the film. Since the film is intended to appear as if it was filmed at one continuous take, the sunlight and lighting had to be the exact same for the duration of the scenes. On cloudy days, the crew would be waiting for just the right amount of sunlight to peek through the clouds. Some days, production had to be called off due to there being no sunlight. During this phase, a lot of things happen at once, so that's why it's important to have a strong director and strong leaders. Right after filming is done, props are given back if borrowed, sets are dismantled, and either thrown out or, most of the time, given to the cast and crew. Records are kept during this process of where things are going and being sent. Fun fact, there's a new series on Disney Plus called Prop Culture. It's pretty cool as the idea of the show is tracking down props from Disney films like Tron, Pirates of the Caribbean, and others. I found the Pirates one really intriguing if you guys want to check it out. While this next step is called post-production, this stage can overlap with principal photography, as this step is the process of going over the actual footage recorded and the editing. Included in this stage are any visual effects that need to be completed, which can be a long period of time for some movies and a small amount of time for others. A big budget movie like one of the Transformers series would take longer in this process than your low budget Honey Boy or The Lighthouse, which don't rely much on VFX or not nearly as much. Sound editing, sound mixing, color correction, and sometimes composing a score are all necessary final touches to creating a film. Like with the other steps, this one depends on how much raw footage was recorded and the amount of visual effects needed to be added. Easily the most essential and important part of the production is actually starting to generate income. Time and effort goes into finding the right distributor. Distributing a film to movie theaters across the world is standard, and after a few months of a hopefully successful box office run, the film heads to DVD and to online platforms. Currently, because of COVID-19, many movies that were either planned for the box office release or were already in the box office are moving directly to online platforms like Vudu or Google and Apple's movie services. For example, one film, The Lovebirds, starring Kumail Nanjiani and Issa Rae, was scheduled for an April 3rd, 2020 release, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the movie was pulled from the theater schedule. As of a few weeks ago, the film was sold to Netflix, which now premieres on May 22nd. So as you can see, there's a lot of thought and care and hard work put into films in the filmmaking process. While there are many essential roles throughout the process, today we're just going to be looking and focusing on the director. Each director is unique in his or her own way, and this is evident in the various styles they use. Their style stems from the way they were taught and their mentality towards the idea of directing. For example, some directors will choose to use color in the scenes that others would not. Brighter or darker colors might be used to influence the tone of how the scene or overall film is. Another factor is seeing a director's style is the way in which they were taught. If they were taught the way of directing from a film school, there would be a significant difference when comparing them to someone who never went to film school or even college. Another way they could be unique is through their mentality. Some directors think that an actor should be told exactly what to do, when to move, when to laugh, when to cry, etc. Another director might leave that all up to the actor to decide how the character handles the situation. Looking at each of these different elements and comparing and contrasting is a way to get insight into them. It's an interesting way of seeing how directors of different backgrounds might compare to those of another. These different factors might influence them and how they direct. So to achieve this, we'll be looking at a large pool of directors and seeing what the similarities and differences between them are. So let's get started. Okay, wait, cut. Really quickly, before we continue, I just wanted to state that I'm going to be doing this by grouping and categorizing directors and the genre of the film they are most commonly associated with, or ones that I associate them with. By doing this, it will make it simpler to understand and will still provide the same results. One more thing. When choosing the directors to use, there is a plethora of potential candidates to use for these comparisons. But I chose these people due to how influential they are to the medium, the way they help me answer my EQ, and also because I have to include some of my favorites. Comedy. Todd Phillips. Todd Phillips is the first director we're going to be discussing. Phillips was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1970. He had a troubled youth. He briefly attended NYU Film School, but dropped out as he couldn't afford to pay due to the high costs. Not letting that stop him, he found work elsewhere and started to climb the Hollywood ladder. He was able to create the first Hangover film, which was a box office smash, and went on to create the other two Hangover films, which continued to break box office expectations. With all this going on, he kept working on projects like War Dogs and Due Date. More recently, he was working on Joker, which starred Joaquin Phoenix, which was another box office smash for Phillips. Comedy in film relies most heavily upon the script and the actors. While most directors are set upon the script given to them and don't make any changes, Phillips actually wrote the script and was open to changing it for what the actor thought was right. He was comfortable allowing actors to improv and change and adapt the story. This mentality is clear in the way he directs films he's done like The Joker and The Hangover. Even though the latest film he directed is different from the other films he's done, he still used the skills he learned to adapt these skills to enhance the Joker character. Anne Fletcher. Our next comedy-oriented director is Anne Fletcher, who was born in 1966. She grew up taking dancing lessons, which led her to pursue a career in choreography. After her move to California, she got involved with the film business, where she would appear in films like Titanic, The Mask, and other films. Soon after, she created films like The Proposal and Hot Pursuit. Some of Fletcher's ideas are that it's important for the characters in a story to be relatable. The audience should be able to relate to the characters in some way. She also thinks it's important to take the time and work around problems that occur during filming. In one of her films, she spent 10 hours perfecting a 5-minute long scene. She said none of it was hard, and that at the end of the day, persistence helped the project go along. Phillips and Fletcher. While both of these talented individuals come from two different backgrounds, they actually have a lot of similarities. They both like to do projects that are focused on characters. Phillips has focused on this element with Joker, but has carried this idea out in the Hangover films, with each character having a unique story. Similarly with Fletcher, who makes her characters seem human and relatable. Also important to note is that they both let their actors take time to get their parts down. Phillips, as talked about earlier, lets his actors morph the script and story to fit what they thought their characters would do. And Fletcher took all the time she needed to make that 5-minute scene perfect. Some differences that they have is that while Phillips directs, writes, and produces all of his films, Fletcher usually just directs them. Another thing to point out is that they both direct different types of films. While they're under the genre of comedy, one directs romance comedies about finding love, and the other directs comedies about bromance and people being drunk. Action. Sam Hargrave. Not much is known about Sam's early life, as he recently just came to be known in the public arena. You may find it strange that he only has one credit that I have listed, but that's because he has a lot of experience doing other work. Hargrave is unique, as he started out coordinating and acting out all the stunts in a movie. Because of this, when directing, he has a better sense of what would look best and how to pull off a stunt in the best way. He worked on a ton of big action films like Pirates of the Caribbean, The Avengers, all three Hunger Games, just to name a few. So when it came to directing his first film, Extraction, which just premiered as one of the most watched films on Netflix, he had a lot of knowledge. For example, a part of the film has a car chase that eventually moves to on-foot action. This sequence is made to look like one shot, and not only that, but it includes the camera shifting from inside the car to outside, and different perspectives smoothly. With all this camera trickery, Hargrave decided to strap himself to the front of the moving car. I'll show the clip on the next slide, but to finish analyzing Hargrave, he has a few morals for filmmaking. No matter what film he works on, he loves to try and include new and never-before-attempted stunts, or ones that are complicated. Another idea of his is that CGI shouldn't be used much, and instead practical effects should be used when available. This stance is surprisingly not so different from our next director.
Get in the car! Turn right onto the bridge.
Michael Bay. Known for his over-the-top explosions and heavy use of CGI in films like the Transformers series, Armageddon, and various others, Michael Bay was born in 1965. He got his start interning for George Lucas, which is something you don't hear often. He started off small, directing short commercials and music videos, before being approached to direct Bad Boys. This is where his career skyrocketed, soon directing films like Armageddon, The Rock, eventually Bad Boys 2, and then the first of the many Transformers films. Around the time of the first few Transformers films is where Bay establishes over-the-top use of explosions. Observing and analyzing his films, it's easy to see that they follow a clear format. In the Transformers series, he likes to layer different things in the shot to provide an overall feeling of epicness and enlarging the scale of the world. To emphasize this, he uses fast-paced editing and quick shots, that while it's faster than the brain can comprehend, it's not so fast that the eye can't understand it. It's clear to see Bay has been in the business long enough to know how to utilize the filmmaking process to simplify things and to make it easier to reproduce. This may be a positive or negative influence, depending on the way you look at it. While he has said his films should not be analyzed, instead to be enjoyed, we're going to keep analyzing them nevertheless. Hargrave and Bay. The first similarity right off the bat is that both directors prefer to use practical effects rather than those done digitally. When you've been in the action business for so long, it's easier to choose a real-life explosion than one put together from a computer. Another similarity is that they both love to use stunts. Directing an action film, this may seem apparent, but when you look at the two in the films that they've worked on side by side, it's clear that they love to use stunts and use them well. The first difference is that Hargrave knows much more about stunts than Bay. Due to all those years of experience working on different films, it's not hard to measure the levels of experience. While Bay may outnumber Hargrave in years of directing, Hargrave blows Bay out of the water with all of his experience. On the flip side of that, while Hargrave may have more experience with stunts and action, Bay has a lifetime's more experience in the actual film business and the people in it than Hargrave. While this is no contest, these factors play into influencing directors, as the more people and ideas there are around, the more they are influenced by them. Another difference between the directors is that Hargrave prefers to use slow, drawn-out sequences while Bay likes to use quick, flashy cuts. Drawn-out sequences like in Hargrave's 12-minute one-shot gives a huge sense of commotion and epicness, while the fast, quick cuts from Bay provide those same feelings, but in less of a clean way. Finally, on a lesser note, the last difference goes back to their backgrounds. Many of the films Hargrave has worked on revolve around the idea of stunts, while Bay's films revolve around explosions. At the end of the day, there is no right way to do action, just different approaches. Television. Vince Gilligan. Vince Gilligan was born in 1967. He grew up making short films, which eventually led to him majoring in film production at a school in New York. After writing a few projects and winning a few awards, he moved to his big break, X-Files, which he wrote and produced many of the episodes of. Then, it happened. Gilligan came up with the idea for Breaking Bad, and of course changed the course of filmmaking. These techniques he used with the camera, the story, and the world he laid out, all of it revolutionary. Most, if not all the episodes he directed went on to serve as the foundation for what a good television show, even film, should offer for its audience. Each season, Gilligan would up the stakes of the show by building up the previous season's work. Trial and error in the production processes influenced him into being a better filmmaker, and that's evident in this series getting better and better as time went on. As you can probably tell, I look up to Gilligan and his work. When watching this show, it was something I'd be fascinated by, and I realized it as something I wanted to do. He really motivated me to start pursuing more things filmmaking related. But enough of me gushing about Gilligan, on to our next television director, Deborah Chow. Deborah Chow was introduced to film by her father, and became awed by it. She went on to study cultural theory and art history, and received her Master's of Fine Arts in Directing in New York, where she created a few short films and a screenplay, which won her numerous awards. She moved on to directing a few smaller shows, one most notably being Mr. Robot. Recently, she directed 2 of the first 8 episodes of the Star Wars series The Mandalorian. Currently, she's working on her next project, which is another Star Wars series she's directing by herself. While Cho is a relative up-and-comer compared to the other directors on this list, her ideas of the medium and her approach is important nonetheless. When shooting The Mandalorian, Chow was sure to have every scene she shot planned out exactly how she wanted, and used each bit of time accordingly. If there was extra time, Chow would be sure to film extra takes or go over with actors and use up each second of allotted time. All her years of experience has made her realize how precious time is on the set, and filming and preparing for each scene is essential. Another thing she stressed was being sure to incorporate life into each of the scenes, especially when working with puppets and CGI on The Mandalorian. Making sure she put life into each of the shots convinced the audience that what they were seeing was real, and increased the quality of the show. Gilligan and Chow. Even though I'm mainly focusing around well-known directors, I consider these two and many television directors out there to be on the same page. They face the same struggles film directors deal with, but just on a smaller scale. This traces back to their first similarities, which is experience. Both of these fine directors have experience not only working on television, but also having worked on directing and producing various films. These skills translate well between the mediums, and experience applies from one to the other. Another similarity is that both of these directors worked on smaller shows before they got their big break. Gilligan worked on the first few seasons of X-Files, and Chow worked on smaller series like Copper and The Vampire Diaries. The main difference found between these two is the way they direct. Gilligan likes to use cinematic shots and incorporate the camera into props and set pieces. Looking at the two's work, Chow really hasn't seemed to do this, whether it's a lack of experience or not needing to do this for projects she's worked on. Stylistic directors. Wes Anderson. Wes Anderson was born in Houston, Texas in 1969. Growing up, Wesley turned to making films with his brothers to pass the time. He loved to read and would put on plays to express his love of storytelling. After finishing college, he realized he wanted to go into the area of film. Wes went on to make films that would receive small amounts of attention here and there, but had his big break releasing films like The World 10 Boo Bombs and The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Anderson's style was solidified in Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and The Isle of Dogs. Some of his styles include using a select color palette that utilizes bright, vivid colors like pink, light blue, and burgundy. What made this work is the way the colors complemented each other, creating a subtle but not so subtle mood for the flicks. Another element of his style is the way he uses models / stop motion to make things appear quirky or weird. What started off with Mr. Fox, Wes implemented into his other live-action film projects to create something that hasn't been quite seen before in film. Adding on to that, it's clear to see how the filmmaking process has influenced Wes when reviewing all his writing he's done for his films. It's clear to see he loves to write, and it has a significant impact on the way he directs. Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino was born in 1963 in Tennessee. His early days were spent working at a local video store where his love of movies grew and grew. During this time, he wrote the scripts for many of his early films like True Romance and Natural Born Killers. After selling the rights to True Romance, Tarantino went on to direct Reservoir Dogs, which was a smashing success. It was all success for Mr. Tarantino at that point, pumping out hits like the Kill Bill series, Pulp Fiction, and recently, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. For the iSearch project, I looked into what made Tarantino like to direct, and I found it was a way for him to express his creativity doing something he loved. Some of the things he's been quoted talking about was not being afraid of failure, and to always strive for the bigger picture. This is made evident in the way he directs and writes his films, often using special techniques like the crash zoom, and using music for a fight scene or to set the tone of mood of a scene. Anderson and Tarantino. It's hard to compare two of film's greats, two people that many critics and filmmakers look upon as the cream of the metaphorical crop. For me, I loved both of these directors' works and feel inspired each time I watch one of their movies. Both directors utilize any tool that they can use to add to the mood, look, or sound of a film. Color and music, just to serve as a few, are some of what both of these directors like to use a lot. Another similarity is the masterful way these artists direct and write their films, injecting these seemingly one-directional characters on paper with enough, for lack of a better term, creative juices to make them seem three-dimensional. In the same way these two are a perfect match, these differences balance them out. It might be obvious, but these two direct completely different films. Wes makes light, quirky films compared to Tarantino's epic, action-oriented films. Another difference is the style they each use. While their use of color and music utilization might be similar, their methods of incorporation is completely different. While Wes might use the colors pink and blue in a scene to show the potential love spark, Tarantino will use yellow to highlight the tracksuit used in Kill Bill, and lots of red for the blood taken during a fight. These two have created some great movies. It's intriguing to ponder the potential of these polar opposites individuals if they were to put their creative minds together. As stated previously, at the end of the day, each director is unique in their own way and brings out something new to each film they work on. No two good directors ever make the same film the same way. While comparing and contrasting is a good way to point out a filmmaker's faults, those same faults have brought them to the place they are today, with the projects they created and helped along the way. In summary, to sort of answer the essential question, there are a lot of elements and factors that influence a director. From basing your films around the idea of stunts and visual effects like Michael Bay and Sam Hargrave, to first getting a solid idea of writing films like Quentin Tarantino, and then moving on to directing. In the case of Todd Phillips and Anne Fletcher, they let the actors influence how the characters are and how the story plays out. We've also seen how the process can influence a director negatively. Sometimes, being at the top of the production chain can negatively affect some directors, making them think that they have a high power. This is where Hollywood sometimes gets its status for being full of snobs and stuck-up rich people. While this may be the case for some directors in the industry, many of the people chosen from this presentation are known for their creativity and being down-to-earth and easygoing. Some might accuse Mr. Tarantino of this attitude, but that can just be attributed to his distinctly identifiable personality. Overall, looking at the whole scope of a production, while the director often gets all the credit, as we saw earlier, there are many other jobs that put in the same, if not more, effort than the director. The director is usually the figurehead of the project, the main one seen by the public and receiving the credit. Going into this business, if you are going into it with the intention of looking at it as a job and the way of expressing creativity, you're not looking for any fame or notoriety. If you were, you'd become an actor or director, as they're the ones getting the credit and attention for their films. For my next steps, I'm planning on pursuing film as a career. I'm not sure what exact career I want, but I've been looking at editing, directing, or screenwriting, as writing is something that I'm often told I'm good at. Whatever step comes next, I know it will take place somewhere on the big screen. I'd like to thank my parents and friends for all the support they've given me through the years. Filming and hanging out with you guys these past 4 years has been a blast. Lastly, I'd like to give a big thanks to my mom for helping me throughout the years with all those last minute late night assignments and being a big help for this project. Well folks, that's it for me. This has been Scene 1, Take 1 of my senior symposium, and that's a wrap. Now I must go begin Scene 2.